All right. Let's have a lecture today on communism. Let's learn about communism. We were discussing communism as it comes up in World War I. The Russian Empire collapses into communism. Well, let's go back and look at communism. Let's talk about it here. And I grew up in the 1970s and 1980s, and this was a huge event. I mean, the fear of the Soviet Union. Communism was a dirty word in America when I was growing up. So let's take a look at this, where this comes from. Well, we go back to a man named Karl Marx, and we'll be taking it to its fruition with the Soviet Union. Let's look at this communism. All right, so looking at a place where it comes from, we have to turn to Germany. The German states, and this is before there was a Germany. As far as a time period, let's go back to the 1800s. Great date in German history was their liberation from Napoleon. In 1813, they rose up in their war of liberation and threw Napoleon back toward Paris, so they liberated themselves. That was a huge event for them. The German states seemed to be united. And into this comes a professor, Professor Hegel. He is a philosophy professor at the University of Berlin. So this is a great age for German universities. They will lead the world in education and great thought. Well, here's what he's teaching. He is teaching in the philosophy department that let's look at barbarism. Let's look at where we've come from, up from barbarism. Man used to be a barbarian, and we're not anymore. Well, what happened there? Well, we want to find a process for that. How did it happen to go from bashing heads in to going to wearing fancy clothes and going to tea parties? Well, there's been a refinement of the spirit, and so this is what he looks at as man's spirit, the spirit of man. How has it changed over time? Well, in order to explain this, how did man change? You need some kind of a process, and the process he comes up with is the idea that of a thesis and an antithesis. That there was once a thesis, and this is the status quo. Wherever you take the snapshot, that there were humans and a status quo. And then something new comes along, an antithesis, an antithesis comes along, and these two will compete with each other, and the result of all this will be a synthesis. It's not the thesis, it's not the antithesis, it's something completely new, a synthesis. And then this will continue on. The synthesis will be hit by something new. So this is called the Hegelian Dialectic. To explain how we got from point A to point D, you had to go through points B and C. There's been a long process of the refinement of the human spirit. So this is how this works. The synthesis, which was a thesis and antithesis hitting each other. The new synthesis becomes the new thesis, the status quo, and then something new comes along. The thesis gets hit by an antithesis, and there will be a new synthesis, which becomes the new thesis, and a new antithesis comes along and will combat and form a new synthesis. So this has been a constant process. Nothing stays the same. Everything is always changing. It's almost imperceptible sometimes. Another thing that Hegel talks about is government, the state, the idea of the state. And for the Germans, this is a very important thing. They're getting ready to create a Germany, or they want to create a Germany. And so how should we view the state? Well, Hegel's view on this is that the state is perfect. It is man reaches his highest level of reason when he comes together and creates laws and constitutions. This is man's highest level. When people join together and live peacefully, that this is where humans display their true freedom. When you are part of a group and you give of yourself, you don't just take everything for yourself, you give some of your rights away so that everyone has rights, then everyone's truly free. And again, you have to keep in mind the German mentality is that they are very law-abiding people, and they're in a very small space. So this fits for them. This philosophy fits very well for the Germans. He also will talk about the state being able to coerce you. If there's troublemaking going on within the state should step in and settle that to coerce individuals to behave and also to protect individuals, coercing some and protecting the others. So this is very much fits with the German mentality of law and order is most important and the state is a great thing. This is against the romanticism going on. As we enter the 1800s here, the artistic period would be called romanticism, and this is not romantic. The romantic idea is one of individuals. Do as you feel, not as you're told. Just follow your heart and look out for yourself and make choices as you see fit. Hegel will be against this romantic idea. again, he's a very famous professor, and this will be legendary in German universities, the Hegelian Dialectic, Hegelian philosophy, and he dies in 1830. But this sets the German mentality through the 1800s and what happens at German universities. Into this comes Karl Marx. Here's our guy. Here's the guy that's going to bring communism to the fore. He is a German. He is born in 1818. He is born in the city of Trier, which is along the Rhine River, city along the Rhine. So he's a city man along the Rhine, very wealthy area. His father was a Jewish lawyer who converted to Christianity. So the reason I bring this up is that later on, you're going to have a man named Adolf Hitler, control of Germany, and he's going to be anti-communist and anti-Jewish, and that's going to play into this, the fact that the founder of communism comes from a Jewish family. He goes to University of Berlin, and he becomes a radical Hegelian. Again, Hegel, his philosophy is written down, and then other people will run with that. You can't just accept it as it is. You have to have some kind of a different view. So there's radical views of Hegelians, and he becomes one of these. He will become the editor of a journal proposing all kinds of radical ideas for the Germans. He eventually will write a dissertation on Greek philosophers, and then he will get his PhD. So this gives him a lot of credibility with the Germans. Germans take a PhD very seriously, much more than Americans seem to do. So a PhD in Germany is a big deal, and he gets one. So his creation, his idea, is the idea of a dialectic. He will take Hegel's dialectic and turn it toward materialism, the dialectic of materialism. If Hegel looked at man's refinement of the spirit, let's look at man's obsession with matter, with material things. And what he come up with is that man has been struggling for ownership. There's a constant struggle for ownership throughout time. Let's go back and look at time. And Marx will actually become a bit of an historian here, looking back at history. Looking back at history, men used to be barbarians. Who owned what? Well, that was done by whoever could bash your head in. The toughest guy owned everything. And then we had a move toward theocracy, where someone would come along and say that they speak for the gods, and so they would own things. And then we had a time of kings, when a powerful man would rule, and his family would rule after him. And they owned everything. And then Europe went into a dark age. Europe went into a dark period where there was no money, and the only way of running things was just simply through acts and ceremonies. And this is called feudalism, the feudal period, where you had a ruler and he would decentralize his power, giving over pieces of his territory to his warriors. It was a warrior state, one based on war and not on money. And into it comes money. Eventually money reappears in Europe into the phase called capitalism. And the people who do capitalism in Europe will become known as this word, bourgeoisie. And this is basically the period he was talking about. The 1800s is the great age of capitalism. Adam Smith has published his book in 1776. So it's the age of capitalism, the age of the bourgeoisie, the age when you need money if you want to own something. You own something because you paid for it. Now Marx then makes some predictions here, and one of his predictions, this is going on beyond history. In history we can look at the past and make assertions about the past, but we're not supposed to take it forward. And he takes it forward. He's going to say that the next step, the next thing that's going to happen is called imperialism, that you will have the great rulers of Europe claiming the entire world as their empires, and that was happening at the time. So he's not stretching it too far to say, well, there's going to be great empires, but his next claim will be there's going to be a great war as these empires will wage war with each other, and the result will be communism. Communism will result in all this, be the end result, communism. As everyone fights each other, the end result will be that everyone is going to enter into a utopia, a communist utopia. So he uses the dialectic to show this. This is a scientific proof of, in his mind, of what he's doing. You will take an antithesis, you'll take a thesis over here, and it'll be hit by an antithesis. In the case of feudalism, the serfs and peasants will rise up, and the new system of government will be the rise of city life. The power of the city people is the synthesis. And then the cities will be hit by the guilds, which will provide a new system called entrepreneurship. And then into this come the proletariats. The proletariats, These industrial workers will become more and more, and then eventually you'll have a uprising into communism. So this is Marx's idea, the historical materialism. Materialism shown historically. And then he goes on to make his claims about mankind and human existence. That mankind, what makes a human human, is that he produces. Men have always liked to produce, to make something. And then the other thing that separates us from the animals is the idea of tools, that humans want to perfect their production and make it better and easier. They make tools. In fact, this is what your existence is. What makes you human and great as a human is your ability to produce, your desire to produce, your will to produce. And of course, how you produce it. This is what defines you, that you want to make something and you better yourself by producing it better. And that's where the struggle comes in. If humans are all about production, then there's going to be a struggle when you're not allowed to produce something like you should, when somebody is going to control the means of production. You want to produce, and someone else is saying, no, I own that, and you can't produce because I said so. And so the result of this is going to be classes, that classes evolve. There are some people who own this and some people who don't own things, and some people who do this and other people who do this, and the separation of humans into classes. And the result is going to be class warfare. As these people want to produce and someone's stopping you, you're going to become hostile. And warfare will result in antipathy among the classes. So the other point of this is written and presented by a professor, a PhD university professor. And we have great credibility. So his theories, Marx's theories, are very logical and clear, presented in a scientific way, such that a lot of people are going to buy into this, that this seems very true, and it seems like his predictions come true, or should come true even. So another thing to look at is control of property. He will go back and look at who owns what over time. And what we're seeing here as he's writing this is the birth of the 19th century. The Industrial Revolution started in England in the 1700s, and by the 1800s it is making its way into Europe. In fact, the Europeans are just jumping all over this. England led the way. Same in America. America also is in our Industrial Revolution. And the people who are in the factories laboring under terrible conditions and have no rights at all are the proletariats, these industrial laborers. There are no rights back then. If you go work in a factory, you do so at your own risk. You take whatever's offered. And in bad situations, you'll take whatever you can get, or else you'll starve. There's no way to provide food. There's no welfare system back then. So the industrial workers are growing in number, and the conditions seem to be getting worse and worse. And Marx predicts that there's going to be a revolution. These workers will reach a point when they won't take it anymore and rise up and kill the factory owners who are treating them badly. Once this happens, once this revolution occurs, he says, the workers will understand what their true calling is, that they want to work and that they should be treated fairly. And this is what will happen, that the workers will rule the world and trade their values freely. In fact, once workers are in control of everything, that the private property will just vanish. If everyone just wants to be able to work to his own desires, then nobody should own anything. Private property will just vanish. There will be no more greed or envy. Greed or envy comes when I own this and you don't own it, and I want that from you. And it won't happen anymore because there is no more private property, so everyone will just get along. Politics will disappear. There's no reason for us to fight each other politically because we all want the same thing. Nations will disappear. Nations are simply artificial lines drawn on a map by a king or a czar or an emperor. Those will just fade away as kings and emperors are killed. And the result of all this will be a utopia, a communist utopia, the workers' paradise. You'll be working and reading and understanding this new world. It'll be a communist utopia. So this is his prediction of a new world. And it basically is a new religion. And in fact, he talks about religion. His view of religion is going to be extremely controversial. If you didn't like his economic ideas, you're not going to like his religious ideas. His view of religion, any religion, is that God or gods is man's creation. Your Bible might tell you that you are God's creation. What he's going to propose is that simply God or gods are man's creation. Men have created this in their minds, that men have created their gods in their own image, that you view God as an old man in the sky who's mean sometimes and nice sometimes because that's the way you are and God must be like you. This will definitely upset people. This is basically atheism. This is a belief that there are no gods. This is atheism. In fact, he will go on to say that churches, what happens in a church, they're supposed to be enforcing God's laws, but really what are God's laws? Well, the church is simply enforcing laws that benefit the ruling class. The ruling class have come up with a way to control religion, and they benefit by the church telling the poor people to just kneel down and take it, and eventually you'll die and get a chance to go to heaven if you're good. So this is simply a money thing benefiting the ruling class. He has a famous quote here, as one of his most famous quotes from his works, is that religion is simply an opium for the masses, that this is simply a way of keeping you down, that you just will inhale this religion and just accept the world as it is and then hope you die and go to a utopia. Anyway, with such ideas like this, you can see why he's going to be driven out of Prussia. He will not be allowed to remain in Germany, that these sort of ideas are not taken by the Germans. And in 1840s, he will end up in Paris. Paris, a place where you can talk about such ideas, maybe a little more freely. It's here in Paris that he meets Friedrich Engels. Engels comes into our story. This guys will become the dynamic duo. Karl Marx, the great thinker, and Engels, the great realist. Engels is a German also, and the son of a wealthy man. His father owns a textile factory in Manchester, England. So this is a German man who is extremely wealthy and has seen his father in action as a capitalist in the top class. And he and Marx will sit and discuss this sort of stuff, what's happening in Europe with industry. And it's together that they will recognize in their minds the evils of capitalism, that how evil capitalism can be. When all people want is money, they will do terrible things to other human beings. And then the evils of a market economy, that Adam Smith was proposing a market economy as a good thing. Well, there's an evilness to it, that when it applies to food and such things, or clothing, or warmth, or homes, that people will hoard these things. People will hoard such things, hoping making the price go up, and then try to make as much money as they can off of people who are desperate. And Engels is able to give some stories that he's seen in factories, that the industrial conditions are growing worse and worse, that they're not even hiring men anymore. They're just hiring hordes of ragged women and dirty children. This is who you find in the factories, that these factories owners, in order to make the maximum amount of money, won't even hire men anymore. They hire women who will work for less and dirty children to work their little hands to work the machines that a big man's hands can't fit in there. And they'll work for cheap. They'll work for practically nothing. So men can't even find work. They just simply wait for their women to come home or their children to come home, take their money away, and become alcoholics or child abusers or wife abusers. And it seems real. It seems very real. If you've been alive at this time, this would have been a very real picture. These nasty smokestacks blowing black smoke all day, everyone covered in dirt. For what purpose? Well, to make something that we can sell to somebody else. And it doesn't even help society. It's just trinkets. So, Marx finds a lot of people who want to listen to this. This seems very real to a lot of people. Marx will become the leader of a communist league. Lots of men, intellectuals getting involved with the idea that this is going to happen. We got to stop capitalism. It's gone too far. They focus on the communes, that this is the ideal good. A commune, a small village where everyone knows each other and helps each other, that's where people are at their best. When everyone works, and if someone gets sick, they take care of them. And they all form a defense in case there's a wolf that comes along, and they all help each other in the fields. As opposed to the bourgeoisie, the money grubbers, people who just want money. The factory owners especially, but also the middle class. The middle class, people who investing in factories and want to make more money through simply just putting their money to work. Today, it's no big deal. Today, you would say, well, yeah, I want investments. I want my $100 investment to pay me $110 at the end of the year. Well, a lot of that's going to be going over to these factories who are trying to maximize every dollar. So, revolution's coming, say these communists. These people are going to rise up at some point. Who's going to lead it? Who are these people that are going to lead the revolution? Well, they're the proletariat class, these poor, downtrodden workers with dying of all kinds of diseases and malnutrition. Eventually they'll rise up. And as conditions become more and more terrible and worse, that revolution's coming. It must happen. It's inevitable, say these communists. Marx publishes a book about this. In 1848, he publishes a book in which he's going to make it very easy reading. You know, it's one thing to publish an academic journal, which only academics are going to read, but we need to get something out there that the workers can read. And so Marx publishes the Communist Manifesto in 1848. It's a very easy to read book. It's very small. And this goes with the idea that revolution needs to be taught. These poor downtrodden workers don't know what they're doing. We talk to them, don't you want to revolt? And they say, no, I just want to finish my day at work and go home. Well, they need to be told that they need to rise up and kill someone, their boss. So this education becomes the new religion. For if you're a true communist, that you're the intellectual and you're educating the poor workers, that they're just helpless without you. Your job as a communist is to get into the factories and teach the poor workers how terrible life is and how perfect a communist utopia will be. And when this happens, the ruling class will tremble. When these workers take their weapons and start killing the factory owners, rich people will tremble. And one of the famous quotes from the Communist Manifesto is these proletariats, this must happen because they have nothing to lose but their chains. They've got nothing to lose. They have nothing. They're just dying. And they're chained in slavery, artificial slavery. And then one more quote, that the workers of the world will unite, that this will be a worldwide event. He's predicting worldwide revolution. And of course, if you're a true communist believer, this can become really important, that it's not just one country or this place or that place. This will be a worldwide revolution where everyone in the world will unite in this utopia. The book is, you can read it at any time. It's an easy read, very small, and it's got all the stories and all the terrible scenes and events and all the explanations of revolution in there. As it's presented, Europe explodes in revolution, not because of the manifesto. It just happened to be really good timing for Karl Marx. Europe went into the 1848 revolutions all across Europe. People will be rising up all across Europe. Well, it started in Paris. Let's see what happened in 1848. It starts in Paris, this hotbed of revolution. The king at the time was King Louis Philippe, and his nickname was the bourgeois monarch. He was a self-made man who proposed that French people need to get into business. And in fact, when asked about democracy, maybe we should let more people vote, his response was, well, yeah, if you get rich, you can vote, sure. When the revolution comes in 1848, it's a very short revolution, and Louis Philippe will run. He will escape to Britain and live comfortably. And then the revolution spread. Once word gets out that France has risen up and thrown out its king, other people get the idea that, hey, if we rise up, we could drive out our king. So this becomes the picture of the 1848 revolution. This is a romantic picture of dead bodies in the streets and the people rising up, children, women, men, Lady Liberty, as the people demand their liberty, rising up and throwing off their invisible chains. In the revolutions of 1848, here's what we see. They seem to be democratic. Everyone is talking about democracy, letting people vote. We've got these experiments have happened in the United States and other places that not everyone could vote back then. Well, people need to be able to vote. Their rights should be written down. There should be constitutions. How come everyone doesn't have the rights written down? Well, we love them in America. We have a constitution. Well, these people want constitutions. And they want liberal reforms. Liberal reforms as such as voting rights and protections and education and things like that, freedom of religion, things that we kind of take for granted in America. Those would have been liberal back then. You also see a lot of nationalism, that as these people rise up,